In the entire history of the NHL, no MVP season makes less sense than this one. In 1954, a goalie named Al Rollins won the Hart Trophy for Most Valuable Player. Normally that award goes to dynasties, scoring machines, players carrying elite teams to greatness. But Rollins? His team finished dead last. They lost consistently. He in fact lost 47 games that year, which was league worst. And somehow the league still voted him as the best player. At first glance it sounds impossible, like a typo in the record books. But once you understand what the Chicago Blackhawks were in the 1950s, this story becomes much less ridiculous. It becomes unbelievable, in fact. Because Al Rollins may have been the only thing standing between the Blackhawks and utter humiliation. This is the story of the strangest MVP in NHL history. To understand how this happened, we need to look at what the NHL looked like in the early 1950s. This wasn't today's league. There weren't any 32 teams. No salary cap, no advanced analytics. Didn't even have save percentage back then. The NHL just had 6 teams, the original 6. And one of those teams was absolutely hopeless. The Chicago Blackhawks. And they weren't just bad, they were historically dysfunctional. Through ownership instability, weak player development, terrible depth, and constantly losing, by the early 1950s, Chicago had become the NHL's punching bag. Following the death of owner Frederick McLaughlin, a lot of the trades were orchestrated by a syndicate, and a lot of them were heavily influenced by rival Detroit Red Wings, sending a lot of their good players Detroit's way. For example, in the 1951 season, Chicago had only won 13 games. That includes 2 of their final 43 that season. During the entire span of the 50s, the Blackhawks won exactly 1 playoff series the entire decade. And it wasn't going very well financially, so Chicago was forced to take on a lot of trades they otherwise wouldn't have, which clearly benefited the other NHL teams. So despite the fact that Al Rollins started in Toronto, he actually helped them win a cup in 1951. Unfortunately, he was traded to the Chicago Blackhawks, pretty much the worst landing spot possibly imagined at the time. So in 1952, he went from the life of luxury to pure survival mode, playing for those Blackhawks. The 1953-54 Blackhawks were catastrophically bad. They finished with 12 wins, 51 losses, and 7 ties. Rollins played all but 4 games, and the other 4 games went in a losing effort to the other guy, so it wasn't going too much better. 12 wins all year. Let that sink in. They lost over 4 times the amount of games that they won. And at times, they barely looked like an NHL team. But here's where things get weird. Despite the losses, players around the league thought Al Rollins looked incredible because every single night, Chicago got outshot and somehow they weren't losing 15-0. Outskated, overwhelmed, and somehow Rollins kept things respectable. The craziest part is that just the year prior, Chicago had set franchise records for wins and points, and they made the playoffs for the first time in years. But it all fell apart so drastically. This was the era before butterfly goaltending. Goalies played stand-up style. They had minimal equipment. They didn't even wear masks at that point. Wearing just primitive equipment, Al Rollins faced endless barrages from his opponents against players like Gordie Howe, Maurice Richard, Jean Beliveau, night after night after night. Basically every hockey nightmare imaginable. And according to people who watched him, he was phenomenal. Not statistically phenomenal, mind you, the stats look absolutely terrible. But context matters. Modern fans are used to evaluating players with stats like save percentage and goals against, but saves weren't even tracked back then. So voters relied heavily on the eye test and reputation. And let's be honest, pure survival for Rollins. Rollins looked like a man trying to hold a flood back with his bare hands. So how exactly does a goalie on the worst team in the league win the Hart Trophy? In fact, he didn't even win the Vezina that year. Well, part of it is timing. And during the first half of the year, Rollins was getting absolutely hammered with shots every night and somehow keeping Chicago in those games. Writers became fascinated with him. Some even viewed him as the only legitimate player on that roster. That may sound harsh, but the numbers support it. And like I said earlier, Chicago's backup played only a handful of games and just got demolished every time. When Rollins sat, things got ugly and fast. The Chicago Blackhawks weren't just losing. They looked entirely non-competitive without Rollins. So voters began asking a different question. Not who's the most valuable player, but who's the most valuable player to his team? And suddenly, Al Rollins had an argument. Because if you removed Gordie Howe from Detroit, Detroit would still be good. And if you removed Maurice the Rocket Richard from Montreal, Montreal would still be winning games. But if you removed Al Rollins from Chicago, the team might have collapsed into hockey extinction. Later on, one hockey writer described the award less as most valuable player, but more like most valiant player. And honestly, that might be the best description for it. Now let's look at the numbers, because that's where this story becomes completely absurd. Al Rollins won the Hart Trophy with 12 wins, 47 losses, and 7 ties. And they might not have tracked save percentage back then, but they did track goals against average, and he had an insane 4.31. That's right, the league's MVP, which is rarely won by a goaltender, was won by a guy who had over 4 goals a game scored against him. Those numbers look impossible for an MVP. In modern hockey, a goalie wouldn't get a single vote. A goalie wouldn't even be employed long term. Some fans genuinely think this is the strangest major award decision in history. And honestly, they have a point. Modern Hart Trophy winners usually dominate statistically. Elite scorers on playoff teams. Rollins was the complete opposite. An exhausted goalie on a disaster franchise. But weirdly enough, that's what made voters vote for him in the first place. That's what made voters respect him. The award that year became a symbol of endurance, a recognition that one team had literally put an entire team, an entire city on his back, which says a lot. It was a reward for surviving an impossible season. So today, Al Rollins is remembered mostly for one thing, for being the strangest Hart Trophy winner of all time. But there's something beautiful about that, because hockey history usually only remembers winners, dynasties, championships. Rollins reminds us that sometimes greatness looks different. Sometimes greatness is just enduring impossible situations, showing up every night, getting shelled with shots, losing over and over again, but still giving it every ounce of effort, and still being the only chance your team has to win. That's what voters saw in 1954. Not dominance, not glory, just pure, undeniable value. And honestly, there may never be another MVP season like it, because modern hockey wouldn't allow it. Analytics would destroy the argument. Media would laugh at the record, and voters would never choose a player from the basement-dwelling team. But for one strange season in the 1950s, Al Rollins convinced the hockey world that he was the greatest to lace the skates that year. And he played for the worst team in the league. Somehow, that feels kind of perfect. If you enjoyed this content, feel free to hit that like button, comment, subscribe. If you really love hockey history, I'm your guy. And let me know in the comments, who would you have picked instead, or who's another really weird award winner? Because honestly, I'm not sure anybody can top Al Rollins in 1953-54.